All right. Hi, everybody. Professor Jeff here. We are going to get started with the first tutorial or chapter in our book, Language Power. Remember, Language Power was written by Professor Dana Ferris. So when I talk about this chapter, when we look at some of the things that are in here, you're going to hear me say, oh, Professor Ferris says, Professor Ferris wrote. When I say Professor Ferris or Dr. Ferris, I'm talking about the author of the book. One more thing I want to say before we begin is just like any time that I'm reading with you, sort of in one of these videos, remember the goal is that you feel again like I'm there reading the book with you. I don't want to read it at you. I don't want you to sort of feel like I'm just going on and on and on in a boring way. I'm reading through this so that hopefully I can make clear the ideas and that you can focus on just understanding those ideas instead of trying to focus on the language, right? When we're reading through a book for the first time, we have to think about, okay, what is the author, in this case, Dr. Ferris, what is she trying to say? And then what's the new idea that she's trying to teach me? So my goal is that if I'm speaking to you and reading through the text, you can understand the language in here and you can really focus on the new ideas. So keep that in mind as we go through the text here. So I am going to, before we start reading, I'm going to pull up my tools so that I can highlight any words that come up for us. And there's my highlighter. Okay, so we're going to begin here with Language Power Tutorial 1, which is about parts of speech. So we're starting here. Do you remember learning about parts of speech when you were in elementary or middle school? Even though you might have been introduced to the concept of parts of speech early on, those parts can be more complicated than you might think. While no one would expect you to constantly identify parts of speech as you read or as you write, knowing how to tell what grammatical category a word belongs to can help you improve your writing style, which is part 2 of the book, and tackle common errors in writing, which is in part 3 of the book. And here Dr. Ferris uses this word category, right? Category is just a group or one smaller part of a bigger, larger part or group, right? So this tutorial introduces 9 major parts of speech. These 9 categories provide a foundation for the other topics in this book. For each category, you'll find a definition, some examples, and cross-references to other tutorials that rely on this information. Cross-references is basically what Dr. Ferris does here, where she says part 2, part 3. So in a book like this, that means if she says, okay, tackle common errors in writing, part 3, that means, okay, part 3 of this book is about how to fix common errors. Or here where it says part 2, before the parentheses here, it says improve your writing style. So when it says part 2, that's cross-referencing, that's connecting, that's telling you to go look at another part of the book. So before we get started, some questions to think about, where she asks you to ask yourself. First, why is it sometimes difficult to identify what part of speech a given word is? How can I recognize the grammatical category of different content words? And we'll talk about what content words are. How can I recognize the grammatical category of different function words? Again, we're going to talk about what that is. And what can I learn about my own writing from analyzing the parts of speech? So things to think about, and I promise by the end of this tutorial 1, you'll be able to answer some of those questions. So the first activity here, this discover activity, just like in every tutorial in Professor Ferris's book, here she says discover. So let's see what you already know about parts of speech. In the text excerpt below, examine the words in bold, then complete the chart on this next page here. So an excerpt, again, just like the word category, similar meaning, different word. Excerpt is a smaller part of a bigger book or text or video or movie or something, right? So if you have a book with 10 chapters, and you take one chapter out of that book, that chapter is an excerpt of the larger, bigger book. Right? So this is an excerpt from actual student writing. That's what this word means here. So this is an essay that a student wrote and submitted in a college writing class. So here's the excerpt. Have you ever thought, if I could start life over again from the beginning, what would I do differently? I have. and it can be a pretty depressing subject. Yet I still think about it sometimes, generally after I've made a big mistake and hurt someone's feelings. If I could just wake up and find myself in the hospital where I was born, in the body of a newborn, but with the brain of someone who has already tried life for 17 years, I know there are a lot of things I would do differently. When I was younger, I lied to my parents a lot to get out of trouble. It was really stupid, but I did it, and it took my parents a long time to trust me again. And here's the source, right? This is the name of the student who wrote this essay. So for each of the words in bold in the text above, identify its part of speech in context. That means in the sentence, using the choices below. Don't worry if you don't recognize or remember all of the terms right now. Just do the best you can. So here are our 9 categories that we will focus on, review, learn, study in this tutorial. So we have nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, articles, pronouns, conjunctions, prepositions, and auxiliaries. And we're not going to go through this together. We're going to do this in one of the live support lessons this semester. But if you look at this page here on page 5, there's this chart. And I do want you to pause this video here, right? Pause this video and try to fill out this chart, right? So look at the words in the sentence. And then over on the here on the chart, it says it gives you the word and it asks what part of speech is this? So have you ever? So what part of speech is have, right? What part of speech is ever? And if you don't know, just like Professor Ferris says in this page, that's fine, right? But make a guess. And if you only know some of them, that's fine too. Like I, right? Hopefully, I is a pretty obvious one. I'll tell you right now, it's a pronoun, right? It's a pronoun down here. So go ahead, pause, take a look in your own book or at this video. Try to go through the chart. Great, moving on. So hopefully you enjoyed that activity. You got to start thinking about parts of speech, reviewing what you know, and looking at a real example of student writing. We're going to continue. And again, I promise before the end of this semester, you will have all of the answers to the activity on page 5. So here we're on page 6. We're going to continue. So it says, considering the big picture. In some languages, it's easy to identify the functions of individual words in a sentence because of the endings attached to them, or the order in which the words appear. In English, however, the picture is more complicated. While clues related to word endings or word order can sometimes help you, they are not always reliable. The most important concept to master about parts of speech in English is this one, and I already underlined it in this PDF, and I'm going to highlight it again. Grammatical categories, that is parts of speech, for individual words must always be identified in context. That means in a sentence. You can't just take a word by itself. For example, the word give, right, and say, what part of speech? Well, okay, probably a verb, but what's it doing in the sentence, right? You need to see the context to know the part of speech. So we'll continue. It is usually impossible to take a word in isolation and label it as a noun or a verb, for example, because many words could fall into either category, depending on how they're being used in a sentence. Parts of speech must be analyzed within a sentence or a longer passage. Consider the word running. What part of speech do you think it is? Now, consider these 3 sentences in which running is used. First sentence, running is good exercise for your heart. Okay. The cabin in the woods has no running water. And the dog was running through the park. With these sentence examples in mind, what part of speech do you think running is now? You can probably see the notes that I wrote down. But if you're looking in your own book, maybe you don't know, right? Running is the present participle form of the verb run. The present participle form of the verb is the base form of the verb plus an ing ending, sometimes adjusted or changed for spelling, like the double N in running. Once the present participle form has been created from a verb, it can be used in 3 different ways. And here are those examples. First, as a verbal noun or gerund, right? And that's like in the first sentence, running is good exercise for your heart. Or as an adjective modifying another noun. The cabin in the woods has no running water, right? So here, running, ing, looks like a verb, maybe a gerund. No, it is an adjective telling us what type of water? Running water. Finally, as a main verb expressing the action of the sentence, that's in our last one here, the dog was running through the park. So there are countless other examples in English of ways in which the same word can fit into more than one grammatical category. The point to remember is, and I'm going to highlight it again, that when you are reading or writing and want to think about what part of speech a word might be, you must analyze that word in a specific context rather than in isolation. This is a key idea. Make sure you get it before you continue. Okay, we're going to continue. All right, so next section here says understanding the details. So the purpose of this tutorial is to give you a better grasp of the major parts of speech so that you can then refer to them in later chapters about sentence construction, word forms, punctuation, and so forth. Thus, we will focus on the parts of speech most important for writing and for understanding grammar and usage rules. We start by separating parts of speech into two categories, content words and function words. And here's the chart that Professor Ferris gives us. So content words are nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, including intensifiers. If you don't know what that is, you will know before the end of this tutorial. And then we have function words. Function words are pronouns, articles, and other determiners, another word that might be new for you all. Auxiliaries, prepositions, conjunctions. Now, okay, Jeff, Professor Ferris, what's going on? Content word, function word. I thought this was a grammar class. We were just going to study verb tenses. I promise it'll make sense. All right, so the next section is about what a content word is and what a function word is and why do these categories matter. Professor Ferris will explain. So here, content words have actual meanings. If you look one up in the dictionary, there will be a definition that goes beyond, so further, more than just its grammatical function in a sentence. For example, if you look up the word boy, the definition will not just be noun or a word that describes a person, place, thing, or idea. It will say something like a male child, right? So content words have meaning, right? They have meaning beyond, more than just grammar. That's different than function words, in contrast, are defined by their grammatical role in a phrase or a sentence. If you look up the word the in a dictionary, it will be described as the definite article signaling a specific noun or noun phrase, right? So content words can move around to different parts of a sentence, the meaning words, but the position of a function word tends to be more fixed. For example, boy, remember content word, noun, content word has meaning by itself, is the subject in the boy kicked the ball, but it is the direct object of the verb in the mother kissed her little boy, right? So here boy's at the beginning, here boy's at the end. In contrast, the can occur in only one place right before a noun, where it signals that the noun is about to follow. So the main thing to remember here about content words and function words, content words have meaning by themselves, right? Function words do not, right? They only serve a purpose. They only serve a function. And that function is to be the glue, kind of the grammar glue that keeps a sentence together, right? So content words, meaning by themselves, they can kind of move around the sentence. Function words, they don't have meaning by themselves. What they do is they keep the sentence together, and they usually cannot move around a sentence as much as the content words. So let's take a look and keep going. We're going to start with content words. This first video is only going to focus on content words. There will be a second video for function words. So because content words are more complex than function words, you may often need to use a combination of clues to identify their part of speech in context. These clues include a general understanding of the purpose of each part of speech. So purpose, right? What are they doing in the sentence? Added word parts or endings that can be attached to the words in this category. So we'll call endings or word parts. And information about how the word acts grammatically within a sentence, right? And the chart here on page 8 and 9 is going to provide an overview of the content word categories and these clues that you can use to identify the part of speech. So the following chart is a more detailed explanation of each category. So we'll start with the nouns here, right? So purpose clues. What do nouns do in a sentence? Well, they describe a person, place, thing, or idea. Now, word parts clues. What are some parts of a word? If you look at a word, how it looks on the page, there are some clues that you can use to figure out if it's a noun. For example, many nouns can be made plural by adding s or es for spelling, and they can have a possessive by adding that apostrophe s at the end. So only nouns take possessives, right? So Jeff's book, Jeff apostrophe s, that's a possessive s. Only nouns get possessive s's, right? Finally, grammatical clues. Nouns occur as the subject, the direct or indirect object of the verb, or the object of a preposition. And we'll look at object of a preposition in a second here. Next, we've got verbs. What do verbs do? What's their purpose? Well, verbs describe the action of a sentence or the subject's state of being. So that's a linking verb or action verbs. And we'll see examples of those in a moment as well. Word part clues for verbs. Many action verbs can be made past tense by adding ed or progressive by adding ing. And again, if you're in this class, you already do this. You already, when you're reading or listening, you hear ed, you hear ing, and you kind of think, ooh, maybe a verb. Okay. And grammatical clues. In most sentences, verbs occur right after the subject, noun, or the noun phrase, right? So that's saying where do you see the verb in a sentence? That's the grammatical clue. Next, we've got adjectives. Adjectives modify, tell you more about a noun. Word part clues. Some adjectives can be made comparative or superlative by or est. Bigger, biggest, happier, happiest, nice, nicer, nicest, right? Those are clues. Adjective, adjective, adjective. And adjectives occur right before a noun, within a noun phrase, or after a linking verb. That's the grammatical clue. So if you're looking at the sentence and you're thinking, ooh, okay, word order, this word comes before a noun. It says nicer, nicer person, person's a noun, nicer, er, it's an adjective, right? Finally, adverbs. Adverbs modify verbs. There are also special adverbs called intensifiers. Now, these are adverbs that can modify other adverbs or adjectives, as Professor Ferris says here. Some adverbs are formed by adding ly to the adjective form. So again, you probably already know this. If you see an ly at the end of a word, it's very possible that it's an adverb. And finally, adverbs can occur within verb phrases and in various other parts of sentences. I'll tell you right now, and Professor Ferris will say this in a moment, grammatical clues are not always helpful for adverbs because in English they can move in the sentence a lot. They can move around. So, as you read through this chart, you can see that the clues are not foolproof. That means not 100%. They're not always perfect. So while many nouns can be made plural by adding s or es, other noun plurals are formed in different ways. For example, the plural of child is children. Some nouns have identical singular and plural forms. For example, the plural of the word sheep, the animal sheep, is sheep, so no plural s. And some nouns cannot be made plural at all. For example, we don't say furnitures, so that's count versus non-count nouns, right? Similar exceptions exist for verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. So let's take a look, and then we'll finish up this video. So, nouns. Nouns describe a person, place, thing, or idea. Nouns are fairly easy to identify. Even if the word parts clues fail for some nouns, the grammatical clues typically work well. Nouns can occur in 4 specific places in a sentence. So, nouns can be the subject. The boy kicked the ball. As the direct object of the verb, the girl kissed the boy. As the indirect object of the verb, the coach gave the boy another chance, right? Because coach is the subject. The direct object is chance because that's what the coach gave. And who did he give it to is the boy, the indirect object. Finally, as the object of a preposition, the name of the boy is Jack. And this is really common, right? Think about this. You'll start to notice this if you've never thought about nouns being the object of a preposition. In the house, at the store, by the tree, on the phone, right? After a preposition, you get almost always a noun phrase, almost always an article and a noun. So we're on page 10 here. Even in the case of verbal nouns, gerunds, such as running, in the sentence, running is good exercise for your heart, we can easily identify the gerund as a noun by both its meaning, it describes a thing or an idea, and its subject position in the sentence. Now, as we will discuss in tutorial 2, nouns also have subcategories that can complicate, make things more difficult, more complex for subject-verb agreement, plurals, and article use. But those distinctions do not typically interfere with the more general identification of nouns. So here's those cross-references. If you want to go look at these tutorials right now, go for it. All right, verbs. Verbs describe the action of a sentence or the subject's state of being. So these are the two different categories of verbs, the main categories of verbs. So together with subject, nouns, verbs are the basic building blocks of sentences. The main verb in a sentence can do one of two things. One, it can express the action of the sentence, or it can describe the state of being of the subject. Verbs in the second category are called either stative, because they describe the state of the subject, or linking, because they link the subject to its description. Usually I like to use the word linking verb. Each book, each class professor is different, so you might have heard these different terms for the same idea. So here's an action verb. The dog ate his dinner. And here's a linking verb. The dog seems happy. So with these two purpose clues in mind, identifying verbs within a sentence can be relatively easy. Verbs are also easy to find because of their grammatical position. In nearly all English sentences, the verb comes after the subject. When analyzing sentences, many people find it easiest first to identify the verb and then to work forward and backward to classify the other elements. As with nouns, some aspects of verbs in English pose challenges to writers. For example, action verbs can be divided into two categories, transitive and intransitive verbs. Tutorial 2, that's next. They can have past, present, and future time markers, tense. But these markers are not consistent across all verbs, and not all verbs can be marked for tense. Tutorial 19 talks about some of them. Verbs can be combined with other elements, such as auxiliaries, to form verb phrases, and a lack of understanding of how verb phrases work can lead to errors. See tutorial 24. But for now, for tutorial 1, tutorial 2, the beginning of this class, the purposes of basic identification, though, you can use the definitions action verb and stative or linking verb and the grammatical position to begin your sentence analysis, and that's where we're going to start for now. Okay, adjectives. Adjectives modify nouns. As the chart on pages 8 and 9 explains, adjectives modify nouns. Modify is a traditional grammar term that just means change or tell more about. For example, if you write the house, your reader may have a general picture in mind. But if you write the tiny greenhouse, your reader will have a much more specific idea because you added the modifying adjectives tiny and green. Now, adjectives can appear in two specific spots in a sentence. So, within a noun phrase, immediately preceding, that means before the noun. So, the big yellow dog. Dog is our noun, big and yellow are our adjectives. Or following after a stative or linking verb, the dog seemed hungry. Right? So here's our noun, dog. Here's our adjective, hungry. So this is a different word order, right? If it's a linking verb, then you're probably, likely, going to put the adjective after the noun. And don't worry about this too much because you already do this all the time, right? The nice, she is, so she subject, is verb, and then give me an adjective, right? She is tall. She is smart. She is generous. Adjectives, right? Because in this case, is a linking verb describing or used to talk about the state of the subject. Now, some adjectives can be made comparative or superlative, while others cannot. So, for example, we don't say deader or deadest. So, dead, deader, deadest. We don't do it. So, while the ER and EST endings can be possible clues to adjective status, not all adjectives will have such word parts. Sometimes confusing point about adjectives is that other parts of speech can be used as adjectives without making any change to the form of the word. This example shows how a verb can be used in the adjective position. So think about the example from earlier. The cabin in the woods has no running water. Similarly, think about the phrase the college newspaper. Is college a noun in this context because it normally would be a noun, right? A college is a place and it can be made plural. Or is it an adjective because it modifies the noun newspaper? It tells you what type of newspaper. In this particular phrase, college functions as an adjective because it tells us more about the noun that follows it, right? So college newspaper, right? Looks like a noun, but in the sentence, in the context of the sentence, it is describing the newspaper, the type of newspaper. It modifies a noun. It's acting like an adjective. Finally, adverbs. Adverbs modify verbs. There are special adverbs called intensifiers that modify adjectives or other adverbs. Of the four content word categories, adverbs can be the most difficult to identify. However, the most basic definition of adverb is that it is a word that modifies an action verb. Just as adjectives tell us more about nouns, adverbs tell us more about verbs. Adverbs can answer questions about the how, when, or where of an action verb. I'm highlighting that because it's a really important idea to think about the function, right? What does a word do in a sentence? So, for example, the dog ran quickly. How did the dog run? Quickly. The package arrived yesterday. When did the package arrive? Yesterday. Are the wheels starting to turn in the brain when you're like, wait, Jeff, yesterday is an adverb? Yes, a lot of time words are adverbs. And the car turned south, a direction. Where did the car turn? South. And remember, the reason these are adverbs is because they are giving us more information about the action, about the verb in the sentence. So the package arrived. When did it arrive? Right? The car turned. Where did it turn? In the preceding examples, the adverbs all occur directly after the action verb. However, sentence position is not always a reliable test for adverbs, which can move around the sentence more freely than words in the other content categories. Some adverbs can be sentence adverbs, meaning that they modify the entire sentence. And as you continue to do more academic reading and sort of more, I don't know, like advanced or literary and academic reading, you see this a lot. A sentence like, consequently, therefore. Consequently means therefore. Also, therefore is an adverb. Consequently, cell phones must be turned off during class. So intensifiers, another type of adverb, add information about the degree of intensity of an adjective or adverb. In the following example, the intensifier very modifies the adverb quickly. So the dog ran very quickly. Very quickly, right? Intensifiers are easy to identify because they always appear right before the adjective or adverb they modify. Think about he worked hard. Okay, he worked hard. How did he work? Okay, hard is an adverb modifying work. He worked very hard. Okay, very is an intensifier modifying hard, the adverb. So while adverbs and adverbial phrases can be hard to identify, they are important to understand because they can affect writers' sentence construction. And that's why we're doing this whole tutorial, right? Because all of these parts of speech affect how you put together, construct your sentences. So we're going to finish the video here, but I do want to encourage you to do practice one right now. Look at it by yourself. You may, I may ask you to do this as a graded lesson or a graded activity, but for right now, take a look at it and see if you can identify the parts of speech. The instructions say categorize each underlined word in the following sentence as a noun, verb, adjective, or adverb. Then think about how to explain your choice by referring to purpose clues, word part clues, or grammatical clues. And then Professor Ferris gives us an example. So Sacramento is very foggy in the winter. She says winter is the word we want to know the part of speech. The answer is noun. That's correct, right? And then the explanation. Winter is a thing. It's a season. It comes after an article, the, and is the object of a preposition, in the winter, right? All of those are the reasons why you know it's a noun. So try to do the same thing here. You can probably see my handwriting. So even if you know the part of speech, great, that's even better. But can you explain why using purpose clues, word part clues, and grammatical clues? So that's the end of this video. We will continue on to the next page here, 14, in the next video to talk about function words. Thanks, everybody.